Sure. My name is Veronica. I think my bio was in the thing.
We call you an Academy Award winner for Moonlight? No.
I do not have one of those three Academy Awards, but yes, I was in a part of a film that did win one or a few. Yes, and I went to graduate school with Shilpa at Columbia University. That's where I studied film and got into producing. Um, right now, so I live in South Florida, so I will definitely bring a unique perspective because I lived in New York, but I now have lived for a very long time outside New York and have worked steadily. And I thought my producing life was over when I had to leave New York. So I live in South Florida and I work in documentaries now. So I worked in narrative features for a really long time. And then a billionaire in Delray Beach, Florida, which is where I live, wanted to start a documentary production company and needed somebody to run it for him. And I said, sure. And now we're on our second one. And he said, it's not as fun as I thought it was going to be. So we'll make two and we'll be two and done. And I will have been employed during a pandemic. And I will have only had to deal with crew sizes of 6 people and 10 people as opposed to 200 people like I'm used to. So that's a little bit about me. And I am in Florida. I came to Florida. I'm very open about this. Is my mom had a massive stroke when she was 59, so she was really young, and so she needed full-time care. And because I was early on in my career, could not afford to get that full-time care for her. So I had to become the full-time caretaker while also keeping my producing career growing and going. And so that's why I live in South Florida. And I now have my beautiful grandmother with her as well. So I call them the Golden Girls, and they bring a lot of fun to my life. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I've also been taking care of my parents during the pandemic, which is a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Although it's worth it. Like, if you're not going to do it for your mom, who are you going to do it for?
Exactly. So, I'll read your official bio. Thanks for introducing yourself. Veronica Nickel currently heads the social issue documentary company Cora Media with upcoming films about hospitals and elite education. She helped launch the 2020 Netflix original Uncorked, directed by Prentice Penny. She was part of the indie drama A Kid Like Jake, which premiered at Sundance 2018, her 5th feature film. The Netflix original entitled First Match premiered at South by Southwest in 2018 and won the Game Changer and Audience Awards. Other recent credits include A24's Academy Award-winning feature Moonlight. Nickel was chosen to take part in the Sundance Institute Creative Producing Summit, Los Angeles Film Festival, Fast Track Lab, Tribeca All Access Lab, and as a San Francisco Film Society Fellow. While earning her MFA at Columbia University, she was awarded the Arthur Krim Award for Excellence in Producing. So welcome, Veronica. And this group is actually all around the country. So we have people in Seattle, Texas, Detroit, all over the East Coast also. So yeah, so it's great that you're not in Los Angeles or New York. And you, after watching Uncorked, you're kind of building this genre of like stories in the South also. Is that intentional? Or?
No, it's not intentional at all. Although I have been very intentional about the films that I take on. The one thing I forgot to mention is that I'm a line producer. So I do both creative producing and line producing. And I came to creative producing, or I came to line producing by doing creative producing, which is not a usually people become a first AD and then they become a UPM and then they become a line producer, or they're an accountant and they become a line producer. So I went about it a little backwards.
So where did you grow up and how did you become interested in film?
I grew up.
And how did that also influence what kind of stories you're interested in also?
Yes. So I grew up in Florida, but not where I live now, not in South Florida on the beach. This is like the best part of Florida. I grew up in the armpit of Florida, Orlando. And I grew up, so I think one of the biggest things that has influenced and been very intentional for me is I grew up in a Latina family. My mom is Puerto Rican and Filipino. And so I was raised by her and her family. And so I am clearly not of Southeast Asian or Puerto Rican descent. I was adopted. But uh, I've always been very expressive, and I thought I wanted to be a writer for a very long time, even as a.
Oh, hi.
Brilliant.
Hi, Wendy. Welcome. How are you?
Sorry, aggravated. I apologize.
That's okay.
Hi. Thanks for helping me.
Bye.
Hi. How's everybody?
Great.
Good.
So, well, Veronica was telling us how she got started and about her childhood background.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to hear.
It's fine. It's totally fine. So I had always wanted to be a writer and thought I would eventually become a screenwriter. And I think even applying to grad school as a producing student, I still had like these aspirations to be a screenwriter until I realized like I definitely have the discipline to be a screenwriter with my producing muscles, but I don't have, when you're in a room of actual writers who are really good at the craft and can do it, you realize really quickly like, oh, I can bring definitely something to the story and helping create that story, but I'm going to leave it to like the professionals to do the writing. But like I said, I grew up in a Latina household, and so I have been pretty intentional about the films that I have chosen to work on, both as a line producer and a creative producer, and have tried to work on like using my access and privilege as a white woman to kind of lift voices and stories that don't readily and easily kind of get accepted by a typical financing system, which is why I've worked on a lot of small indie films, because you don't get big budgets to make those films, and hopefully that is changing. It seems like that might be changing nowadays, but that's, I think, how I wanted to be a writer. I didn't discover filmmaking until I took a filmmaking appreciation course in undergraduate, but by that point it was way too late to switch over. So I like set my sights on grad school as doing film school, and that's what I did. But I waited a while. I went and got life experience and then went back to grad school for film. And I was very focused when I was at grad school. Shilpa and I were both pretty, like, you're in there doing, be very strategic about what you do, what you choose to work on, how you spend your time, because I learned that before going in, because I had like corporate experience before going back to grad school. I really understood the value of my time and time management. So I'll just leave it there. I'll let Wendy introduce
Okay,
herself.
yeah. So Wendy, where did you grow up and how did that influence the kind of stories you like to tell? And then how did you get involved with filmmaking?
Okay. Well, I grew up in New York City, and my parents were Holocaust survivors. And I always had a very clear drive towards self-reliance. And I started out actually as a ballet student when I was a kid, not a kid, but in high school, basically. And I auditioned for the school for the New York City Ballet. I was lying about my age already when I was a teenager, and I was really too old to catch up with where I should be to make it at the sort of highest level for the New York City Ballet, which was what my passion was. So I actually went to college instead of dancing, and I went to Oberlin, which is a real social justice school, very progressive and as far away from New York City as I could imagine going. I couldn't imagine California at that point because I was still riding the bus, from New York to college. And I actually majored in English literature at Oberlin because that was my comfort zone, was reading and writing. And it turned out, with hindsight, that that's a really strong foundation for movie making, in my personal opinion, because it gives you an understanding of how to reach people through storytelling, and movies are just visual stories to me. It's literally having the same emotional impact that one would have, having read a novel, but using visual imagery. And I think the fact that I used to be a dancer and that I thought in terms of, what you're seeing as opposed to what you're, kind of creating in your own mind, I think it actually helped me a lot and transitioned me kind of unknowingly into the field. I spent my junior year at Barnard in New York because I found Oberlin really rural for me, and everybody there was very academic in their orientation, and I wanted a job. I wanted to make money. I wanted to be in the world. I wanted to create stuff. And at Barnard, one of my professors, I took a dance history class, and she was actually the critic for New York Magazine at the time, the professor. And she introduced me to the woman that was producing dance for public television. It was a series called Dance in America. And to me, that was like the dream of all time, was to learn a skill, meaning television production, in the context of my passion, which was, George Balanchine was still alive and Jerome Robbins then, because I'm much older than all of you. And to me, it was like the perfect job. It paid $11,000 a year. I started working when I was 20. I graduated Oberlin in half a year. To take the job in December, I did 20 credits in one semester because I was offered the job at the end of my junior year. And I took a couple more classes at NYU to finish up while I was working full-time at PBS. It was a series called Great Performances. It still exists, but now it's mostly an acquisition series. Then we were making programming. And as it turned out, the guy that was one of the key directors, his name was Emile Ardolino, and he directed Dirty Dancing. That was the first film that he made. And the gentleman that choreographed that film for him, Kenny Ortega, I just produced his last 3 movies. So there was this sort of a coming full circle, but obviously in between, I moved out to LA after doing a bunch of production work, very sort of high-end public television at the Metropolitan Opera or the BBC. I lived in London for a year because there was a reciprocal relationship between public television and the BBC. So I worked in London for a year. And then I moved to LA having sent my resume, which had all these kind of Tony production credits, physical production credits. I had gotten up to being an associate producer at public television. I worked for Jim Henson. I worked for the BBC. And then I sent my resume to feature film production entities that made movies that I loved. And the one that offered me a job, I was then 27, and I had already been doing production for 7 years. The one that offered me a job was actually Larry Terman, who produced The Graduate and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and he offered me a development job. And I literally did not know what the word meant because I had only been doing physical production. So I called up somebody I knew in LA and I said, who's this guy and what does this mean? And he said, take the job, take the job, take the job. So that paid, I think, $26,000 a year. And I learned feature film development, which is basically the part of the community that's screenwriters, their agents, their managers, and then all the directors. It's all integrated into sort of the making of movies. Obviously it's a community process, and it takes a village, so to speak, to make a movie. So I learned all of that and kind of progressed up the ladder of development. I worked for Larry Terman. I worked for Richard Dreyfuss, the actor, when he had a deal at Disney, and we did Mr. Holland's Opus, which he got an Oscar nomination for. I worked for Linda Obst at Fox, we did Contact, which was a Jodie Foster film directed by Zemeckis. We did One Fine Day with Michelle Pfeiffer and George Clooney. We did really kind of And then from there, I partnered with Sally Field, the actress, and she wanted to direct, and I produced a couple of movies that she directed. That was, again, a deal under the aegis of Disney at the time. And then I ran a company so I kept going from sort of director of development to vice president of development to executive vice president of development to president of, Fogwood Films, which was Sally's company, and then DeLine Pictures at Paramount, which was Donald DeLine's company. And I produced a movie there. I executive produced a movie called The Italian Job, which was a big studio movie. And that one made me fearless because
After all.
yeah, that one was so big and so a lot of stunts, which I had never done before. A big cast. It was Mark Wahlberg and Charlize Theron and Edward Norton and Donald Sutherland and Mos Def and Jason Statham. It was a lot. And I worked 7 days a week for 8 months on that movie. And, I really learned. Sherry Lansing was running the studio then, and I really learned to take on the responsibility of having a point of view on that movie, because the other producer was totally over his head. And so if you have to move forward, you either crumble or you move forward. And I changed second unit directors on that movie. I fired a guy who was doing a terrible job with all the action stuff, and I brought in the James Bond guy who did a great job. I fired the editor on that movie because he was just passive, and brought in a guy who was an action editor, but he wasn't famous yet, and he went on to win the Oscar for Bourne. He did all the Bourne movies for Paul Greengrass. His name is Chris Rouse, and we made the movie a good movie. Sherry Lansing came in and watched the first cut in the editing room and said to the producer and me, "The movie's great. I love it. It's over when the truck drops through the street." And we looked at her and I said, "But Sherry, there's another 45 minutes. She said, "I know. You'll figure it out. Bye." And she left. And that was, it's all a lesson. And then from Paramount and doing big movies, I actually found I could do movies that were more to my taste by running an independent hedge fund financing company that was doing more gap financing, and I made them into a production entity called Endgame. And at that company in 3 years, we made I'm Not There, Todd Haynes' film about Bob Dylan, The Brothers Bloom, which I loved, which was Ryan Johnson's second movie. He just directed Knives Out, which he wrote, but he directed Star Wars. He directed Brick, which I had seen. I love him. He is just the best person. And we did An Education. And we did those 3 movies in 3 years. And that was more reflective of my personal taste, which I enjoyed. And those movies had a budget range from, An Education was $6 million. And Bloom at that time was 14, and I'm Not There was 18, which was a lot. And that was Harvey Weinstein, and that's a whole other story. But
Kate Blanchett as, right?
Kate Blanchett, yes, all the actors worked for $10,000 a week on that movie to work with Todd. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from each movie experience that you have. They're all really different. And I got divorced, so I had to stop working. So I stopped generating money so I could get out of my marriage. And when I went back, I actually did the Disney franchise of 3 movies that Kenny Ortega did, these big musicals with kids. So, and now I'm developing a movie for Netflix. So I don't want to talk for too long. Yeah.
So, okay, in our group, we have people who are making shorts, first features, and then third and beyond features. Do you have any advice for packaging for both of you on the development side, since you both have that experience, and moving from independent into directing studio projects? Also, people are at that transition.
You want to go? You go ahead first,
Go ahead,
please.
Veronica. Or you can also tell us about your own experience doing that.
I mean, I guess the question was kind of all encompassing. What is the specific question that you
Okay,
want me
so
to answer?
packaging, let's talk about packaging. What is
Okay.
packaging, and any tips you have on packaging for people who are in various stages, but
Yeah.
generally emerging or mid-career directors. Yeah.
I mean, as a director it depends on what budget level you're talking about. And so packaging for an indie film that doesn't have any, if you're
Yeah.
financing it independently and all of that, then your game is very different than financing it a different way. So if you finance something through Netflix, they literally have very little care about who is packaged in the film, because they say that your film, they will find the audience, like their algorithm finds the audience. So they're less picky, whereas an A24 who does theatrical releases is a little more hands-on and wants to know. And like, there's a game, right? Sometimes you can't get financing until you've packaged the film, and sometimes,
Right.
so it's, and when there's smaller films, then you actually, before you can package the film with actors, you have to package your film with producers, which means you have to find, usually you're trying to find an executive producer who will come on board and lend credibility to your project. Your $3-5 million, I mean, even when you're first starting out, your $1 million project, you're just trying to get credibility for. So, packaging looks different depending on what kind of film you're making. And like every film, every strategy is kind of specific to the film. Like, who do you go to if you have a film that is featuring African Americans, a family drama, like who do you go to for those sorts of things, like working with Apprentice Penny on a family drama set in the South, packaging looks very different than working with a first-time feature director, white female, trying to make a New York City-based film about a young Black woman. Like, by the way, casting a teenager who will never have draw for, like they're not going to get a name. There were 2 names, and one was Willow Smith, which, so it's like you have 2 young, at that time, 2 young Black women who could finance your film. So it plays, so you package the film. If your film is small enough, you have to first package it with an executive producer and a producing team, and then you have to try and package it with your casting director. That's the next kind of packaging you do before you even start packaging your film.
And then, for example, with Moonlight, Barry Jenkins had done
he did Medicine for Melancholy. Yeah, he did Medicine for Melancholy first, which he shot on the weekends. Like, he didn't shoot that film the way
he was working at the Gap, and he shot it on the weekends.
And when we made Moonlight, we didn't think we were making Moonlight. We were making Moonlight. We were making an amazing script by a very talented director and writer based on a play that was good, but it was not, it was a labor of love. I slept on an air mattress and drove a 15-pass van as the line producer on the film. So like everybody wore multiple hats and did lots of stuff. And that was a tiny film that had been packaged. So you still we made that movie for no money. It was a union film everything was negotiated. So I know you wanted to talk about like rates later on, like the most anybody made on that film was $200 a day. Like,
oh wow, really?
When you want to, so like I'll leave it there.
Okay. And then also bringing on the EP for that, who is an established EP.
Right. So they brought in Plan B, which helped and I was not on the project at that time. So they were able to get Plan B on, which helped them get A24. So that's where they had met. I don't know if any of you have seen Medicine for Melancholy. I happened to have watched it in film school and fell in love with it. So when I got the script, I remembered Barry's first film. And anybody who read Moonlight, it's a great script. It's so different because it's a triptych, so it feels different. And so, an executive, Plan B actually happens to be open to reading a lot of scripts from people, but not a lot of companies are open to that. So you just have to find the companies, and that's just research. That's you on your computer for hours at a time trying to find the right companies.
Exactly. And even, I mean, directors basically do a lot of producing for themselves. So
you are a producer on your film. If you're a director of an independent film, you will be producing on the film as well. You will not get a producer credit because although Prentice got a producing credit on Corked, but like you will be directing and a part of the producing process. You can't be that far removed when you don't have more than $10 million. Like, you're going to be in it.
So Wendy, so you are a rock star exec producer that we're talking about.
Oh, you're so nice.
So,
Thank you. I don't feel like a rock star. Thank you.
so give us your perspective on this, and also different budgets and ranges.
Sure.
And education versus the Disney Descendant trilogy, for example.
Totally different, obviously. Well, I think I had an advantage as an executive producer in the independent realm because I was running a financing entity called Endgame Entertainment. So I had been brought into that company, which had just done gap financing, which basically means people had brought them independent movies that were almost financed, and Endgame would fill the gap of financing. They would put in the rest of the money, usually in a really obnoxious deal where they really were punishing to the filmmakers. And they hired me to actually produce movies, like make movies happen at the company. And so I had a bank basically behind me. However, they were gap financiers, so they were very profit oriented, and they literally had a banker who was the partner at the company. I was the only woman there. It was not a pretty picture, but what I would say is there's a very, very limited group of foreign sales agents who are your key, in my opinion, in my experience, to packaging an independent movie. So I'll use examples from the Brothers Bloom to an education. The Brothers Bloom, we used a gentleman named Glenn Basner was our packaging agent. He now produces on his own and runs a company that's his company called Film Nation, which is in New York. And at the time, he worked his way up, having started with Harvey Weinstein years ago. And his specialty was to be able to evaluate for you as the producer and or director of an independent film. So I had Ryan Johnson's second script, The Brothers Bloom. He had made Brick, which I loved, which cost $450,000, which he had shot it at his high school, and he got most of the money from people in his family or family friends. I really believed in him. And when he showed me his storyboards for The Brothers Bloom, I was blown away. And he actually his cinematographer was his best friend and cinematographer from USC. So they're film school background people, unlike I'm not. I just learned by working. So we had lists of actor combos for the Brothers Bloom. And Glenn would basically evaluate how much money for foreign pre-sales each actor would get you. So we were originally going to make The Brothers Bloom with a cast of Edward Norton and Drew Barrymore. They were both attached to the movie. We had gone to contract with both of them. And that combo got us enough pre-sales, meaning in Europe, in Asia, to cover over a significant part of the production budget, so that my company, Endgame, didn't feel that they were exposing themselves to too much risk or loss of money, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, what ended up happening was Edward bailed and Drew bailed, and you start over. And we ended up actually with a combination of Mark Ruffalo and Adrian Brody and Rachel Weisz. So this is literally the same script with completely different casting, right?
Yeah.
But it was a combo of putting together enough so that Ryan, the director, could see his movie with the different versions, you know, and could realize his story with different actors, but also you could marry getting it made by covering some of the cost ahead of time. With An Education, which was actually a smaller budget, Nick Hornby was the writer. Nick Hornby is a very famous British novelist who had never written a screenplay before. And his wife was the producer in the UK. And his agent, was a very famous British literary agent, had given me the script for An Education at the Toronto Film Festival where I was showing The Brothers Bloom.
Okay.
And she handed me this script and she said, I know you're going to like this script. You're the person to make this script. And she had some money from the Isle of Wight that she thought was really like dodgy. She didn't trust the money. And I guess she didn't trust who wanted to make the movie.
We actually had a class in film school where somebody got screwed over by the Isle of Wight. It was funny money. It was fake.
Interesting. So
But
she
they
was
were like
correct.
about to go into production and found out the money doesn't exist.
Well, exactly. And she came to me with Endgame behind me and she said, I know you'll respond to this material and you'll actually protect the movie and make the movie if you love it. And I loved the script. My daughter was the age of the character in Nick's script at the time that we made the movie. And I really felt, I don't know how many of you got a chance to see An Education, but it's this kind of archetypal female life experience journey story, you know, and I related to it. Most women relate to it in some way or another. He's an older man and he preys upon a teenage girl. And it was Carey Mulligan's first starring role. She had just been in Pride and Prejudice as one of the little sisters, Keira Knightley. And at the time, I loved this director, Lona Scherfig, who is from she's actually lives in Copenhagen, and she had directed Italian for Beginners, which won the Golden Bear at Venice. And I loved that film. And no, not a lot of people had seen it, but I loved her sensibility. And she wanted to direct the film. And we started trying to cast it. And my company, Endgame, wanted to cast Emma Watson because she was a big star in Harry Potter, right? She was the female of that age group who was British, who would get us pre-sale money for An Education. And Emma, God bless her, did a terrible test. Terrible. She was not right for the part and Lone didn't want her. And Carey Mulligan, who nobody had ever heard of, knocked it out of the park. And I totally agreed. And I met Carey Mulligan in person, and I think she was 21 at the time. And she was the sharpest, clearest, most prepared, I mean, to die for. I immediately respected and admired her and thought she could carry the movie off. And Endgame was actually really negative about her because it didn't cover their exposure financially. And it was a $6 million movie. It was not like, for them, it was not a big risk, but they actually tried to get out of making the movie, even though they had already gone to contract with the BBC that had developed the script. And the BBC threatened to sue them if they didn't go through with the movie. So they made the movie that Lone wanted to make with Carey really angrily, really begrudgingly.
We were talking about that. Well, also in Casino, Martin Scorsese famously didn't want some of the cast members, but then the financing basically
it's a tricky balance to find because, you know, as the producer, you're financially responsible. You're also creatively responsible. And those are both huge responsibilities, in my personal opinion. And you can't subjugate one to the other. in my opinion. I suppose I'm not really telling the truth because I would go toward the creative first and then the money, because I think everything is a roll of the dice. Every movie is a roll of the dice. And I really believed in Lone and Carrie as a combo. And that movie ended up, you know, we were on budget, we were on time, no problem. And everybody worked for very little. Carrie was taking the bus in LA. She made no money. I literally paid for her ticket to Sundance personally because Endgame wouldn't bring her to Sundance.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, it was ugly. And we won at Sundance in the world category and for cinematography. And there was a big bidding war at Sundance. That was our premiere. That was our market, basically, which is a whole other story. But it ended up going to Sony Classics. Harvey Weinstein tried to do an end run around it. And we just I actually got everybody to sign all the paperwork so he couldn't.
Okay.
And so every situation is different. And you have to, I think it's what Veronica's saying, you have to use all of your brains and resources in yourself to just keep problem solving, to keep moving it forward. If it's not going to work with this cast, it'll work with this cast. If it's not going to make people happy, but you just know it in your soul, it's going to work. Fight for it, you know?
And so for both of you, what kinds of things impressed you? Because you said that, a director was very prepared when they came to you, or an actor was very prepared. So for both of you, just offhand, what kinds of things impressed you in terms of preparation when somebody meets you for the first time?
Veronica.
An easy question.
This is the issue. I get pitched a lot, and I usually only, if this is
Yeah, exactly, right?
this is the game. I work with people I know and trust, and this is how it's hard to break in with an established producer, because I'm giving you 7 to 10 years of my life, and you are paying me for 6 weeks of it or 4 months of it. And I'm going to give you a lot of my time. So I'm going to be married to you. And so and I didn't know this early on. So I got married to a lot of people early on that I didn't want to be married to.
Yeah.
And you can't divorce yourself. You are stuck there. And so now, I mean, as a line producer, it's great because I come in, do my job, and I say goodbye and I go on my merry own way, and the film does its thing. But like as a creative producer, when you're on from development through paying back your investors and giving them their schedule Ks, which we all just did, and as an indie producer, you do all of that for 7 to 10 years. So you are married to these people. So it's hard. I don't take pitches. I will offer my support of your film by introducing you to people and hearing your pitch and doing whatever, but I very rarely attach myself to stuff. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a caretaker for, my mom who's disabled and my elderly grandmother, and I have a life and I have a career of my own stuff. So like, I have learned in the short time.
Well, let me frame it in a different way. What kinds of collaboration qualities work for you in a collaborator?
Yeah, I mean, I think this
because people can be,
I think you have to have a good eye. Even as a director, you have to have a good eye. So if I don't think you need to draw, but you need to pull together a beautiful pitch deck. I think you need to have editing skills, which I think is definitely of this generation and maybe my generation a little bit. Like directors can all kind of edit for themselves. And I'm talking like at an indie, I work in an indie space, which is like 15 million or less. You just have to be able to show me that you can do a lot with a little. And I don't know, like I have just run into a lot of directors that are pretentious early on, and you don't have the experience or money to be pretentious early on. You have to be able to, you have to see limitations as opportunities to expand and rewrite and reimagine, and you lose a location and it's whatever it is, you have to be able to take that on and pivot. You have to be like a master pivoter, and I have to see that quality in you. So you have to somehow communicate the fact that you can operate and make something beautiful. I did this teeny tiny film called Stand Clear at the Closing Doors with an artist. His name's Sam Fleischner. And the thing that wanted me to do that film with him was, he was like, just give me a camera and I can give you a beautiful image. He was a cinematographer turned director. And he was like, I can give you a beautiful image. I don't need all this other BS. I don't need it. And he didn't want to work with actors. He wanted to work with non-actors. And he did a beautiful film about an autistic boy who gets lost on the subway. And
I want to see that.
I think it's probably not on Amazon anymore. I mean, it came out a long time ago, but like, and he did a beautiful film, and so that was that was the thing that stuck for me with him, is him saying that. Then I believed that he really could make this teeny tiny film for $300,000 where we all lived in a house in Rockaway Beach, New York. I mean, we got hit by Sandy out in Rockaway Beach making that film. So it's like, you have to really want to go into war with the person, and you never know what it is you're going to say that's going to, like, and I'm sure Wendy could also attest to that, like something sticks for every, when she interviews Carrie, or like there's some one thing and you don't know what your one thing is, but just be on your toes, be as prepared as possible, know your vision, stick to your vision, and yet be open to pivoting. Like, I guess that's the big thing, is like, you have to have a vision and you have to be able to stand for that vision, but you also have to be, at this very same time, be open to being able to pivot to make that vision possible. I don't know what that quality is called, but that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and for me, it's also like being clear in terms of communication and like no drama, basically.
No drama.
Because you're going to be working so intensely together for so long. So Wendy, how would you answer those questions about what impresses you, or what has impressed you that people have brought you, and then what are good collaborative qualities to work with long term?
I would say for me, I'm very script driven. Okay. So if you read so much as a producer, and I came up a different way than Veronica. I always had these studio jobs, right? I started as a director of development and then a VP of development. At all of these jobs, you're the intake point for the massive quantities of screenplays and pitches. So, and book manuscripts, and your story central. So I did that for such a long time, and it, for me, really came down to what connected for me personally, what moved me, what gave me some kind of real emotional or intellectual, I can't forget this kind of feeling. And usually in reading material that hit me that way, I would see the movie. I wouldn't see exactly the movie that the filmmaker is going to actually release, but the tone, the purpose, the quality of it, and the optimism of it. I never wanted to make, slasher movies, really violent movies, I was never in it for like, what am I gonna make money off of fast? It was always, for me, usually themes of individual responsibility. That seems to be where I gravitate toward thematically. And theme is really important, and I think it identifies you as a producer in the community. Mm-hmm. That, the agents know kind of what you're going to respond to. It aligns you with certain writers and directors and filmmakers, and not with others. Mm-hmm. I developed a script that I loved called Pain and Gain, and somebody slipped it to Michael Bay, and that was my worst nightmare, frankly, because it was a great script. And Michael Bay is not my first choice director in terms of taste or somebody I would want to work with ever. So, but he gets the movie made, right? And he got the movie made. And in my head, that was a very different movie.
Right.
So that was where it's sad, and that can happen. But I always felt very much, and there's no right and wrong. Everybody's different. I was always making a living, supporting my family, having a full-time job where I had health benefits, and there's a big cost to that. I worked with a lot of assholes, a lot of bad people, and I'm exhausted. I will tell you. And
Although I do want to say that I've worked with a lot of assholes and I didn't have health coverage, so I'm not sure what that says.
So there's no perfect answer to this. I mean, I was running Linda Ope's company at 20th Century Fox, and this list of the 10 most abusive bosses came out, and she was on it, and she had drug problems, and oh my God, it was a nightmare. So I guess.
And she wrote a memoir, right? I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
don't even. She
Well,
didn't
you
write
worked
it.
with Harvey Weinstein, you just said, so.
Don't even. It's just been. So now now I will only work with people that I know and like, and I don't want to work as hard the same way anymore to be vulnerable to terrible people. But there are a lot of wonderful people also. So I would say, I loved the screenplay for The Brothers Bloom. And when I met Ryan for the first time, he was working a full-time day job doing like packaging at some post-production company. And he showed me storyboards for the movie. He was literally able to envision shooting the movie to cut it. He was so prepared to make it for as little money as humanly possible. And he had such depth of capacity to rewrite, to cut for himself, as Veronica said, to understand physical production and actually delivering the film. And that film, I loved that movie. We shot that in Serbia, which was a hard place to go. Hard place to go. And Romania, which is just the pit of the earth. And but it made the budget go much further because it was supposed to be a travelogue and it was supposed to feel very expansive. In the case of An Education, I met Nick Hornby, and I admire Nick Hornby's writing terrifically. And he was extremely hostile toward anything Hollywood and had avoided writing a script. And actually, this was not based on his own novel. It was based on a short biographical piece that his wife had given him, and he imagined from Lynn Barber's biographical piece, which was this archetypal, the young girl being exploited by the older guy and surviving it story. And he imagined all the characters around it and placed it in a context and all of that. And I really felt, we liked each other in person. He's not a sweetness and light person. But if you have your own opinion as a producer and you are willing to put yourself out there honestly, sometimes that will go very far with creative people, because they're all alone out there, so to me, going through this with Nick Hornby was really worthwhile to me. And I believed that we would be able to continue to communicate all the way through it. And we were, and he had to rewrite. When we cut it and tested it, we did a different ending for it. In the original ending, Peter comes back to Oxford and tries to get back together with her. And we cut it and ended the movie on her, that she never let him go near her again and that she had moved on. So I think you have your own instincts and your own intellect to depend upon. and that's kind of all you've got. And I don't think realistically, for me anyway, working in bigger companies that were affiliated with studios or that had their own money, I couldn't only work with people that I liked and knew. I had to get movies made, generate movies that were commercial, enough to justify them making money for people. That was always the pressure, honestly. And even in the independent realm, which seems like, a way to be pure, for me, in my experience, it's still a business, and still people are going to have to trust you to give you their money, that they don't want to lose to finance your movie. So, you have to be willing to be honest with your filmmaker and yourself and your financier. And as Veronica said, adjust, pivot, do a different ending, test the film, recut the film, whatever it takes. You have to be able to be true to the story that you're making and choose that story for a reason. But it's not a novel that you're sitting alone in your room writing. There are a lot of people involved, and they all have to get paid, and the financiers have to be paid back, or you won't get to do another movie. The first movie I did at Endgame was I'm Not There, and they wanted to shut the movie down unless we covered a certain amount of pre-sales before we started shooting. And the way that they decided to handle that was they went week by week in prep, funding the production as we were trying to prep for the movie, as we were trying to close these foreign deals for territories. It was a nightmare. But, you're not going to change Cate Blanchett's schedule or Richard Gere's schedule or Heath Ledger's schedule. So you're not going to move your shooting schedule. You're going to get that money and those deals signed, even if it's excruciating and they're giving you $100,000 a week and no more. So, and you have to start shooting in 3 weeks. So it's each situation's different, and you have to look at the people that you're working with. I believed in Todd Haynes. Christine Vachon was the partner for him on that, and I was very much on the outside of that relationship because they knew each other in college. That's a very different experience for me than working with Ryan or working with Lone Sherfig. But each experience is its own thing. So I don't know if I just answered your question or not.
Yeah, you did, definitely.
Okay.
So we're coming close to the hour. Do you guys have a little more time?
I do.
Okay. All right. So we've been trying to demystify talking about money, and that's basically, as a producer, that's the majority or a big portion of what you do. And then also the gender wage gap. So do you have any thoughts about that, or any tips for people who are just starting out?
Veronica.
So I hope that this is changing, but I am still of the era, because I started making films like 10 years ago, where I did not get paid for the first few feature films that I did as a producer. And I hope that is changing, because that was an expectation that it's a labor of love. Even as a producer, you don't get paid. And I was fortunate enough to be married to a person who would support me through that. And I grew my own food in a garden, and I catered other people's film shoots to like make ends meet and do whatever. But I hope that is changing. It is not a good practice. And we are the only industry that expects you to work for free for a long time until attrition means that you can get paid, which I think is a really horrible standard.
Horrible.
And I did not start making a real paycheck until I got an agent. And I didn't get an agent until I worked for free on my own stuff, producing other people's stuff. So I don't know how you, and I'm always very clear that I was married to a person who supported me to go after that. We had a certain amount of time. So I graduated graduate school with Shilpa. I graduated early. We were in different years, but it was a 3 to 5 year program. And I finished early because I was like, if I'm not going to get paid and be in grad school, I'd rather not get paid and go make features and not get paid. So it was, I think we gave ourselves 1.5 years for me to go and not get paid. And so I made a few features in that time, which to me, looking back, how do you make 3 features in 1.5 years? I don't know, but you do it when you have to. For me, I got an agent. Like I said, I came to line producing from creative producing because my first film was $150,000. My second film was $300,000. My third film was $500,000. And so I had to do everything myself, including starting the company, doing all the legal, all the stuff myself. And that meant that I could then, once I hit the $1 million mark, I could then kind of sell myself as a line producer to other $1 million movies. And that's what I did. And so that's how I ended up on Moonlight. Adela found me, but I ended up on Moonlight because they came through my agent as well. So, I think this group is mostly directors and writers and directors. It's a tough, similar to packaging, it is a tough racket to get your self-representation. I know because I have been with my director and writer friends trying to help them, like with my own connections, trying to help them. And you just have to, like, with your community, and just realize that it's like a nutrition game. So like people will drop out, and if you can keep going, it's just a horrible system, but it is unfortunately the way it is. The other thing I would just say is, for me, labs were super important, which is why I include them in my bio. But I had Sundance behind me, Tribeca, All Access, the San Francisco Film Society, LAFF at the time had their fast track. Like, I did all of those programs, and they opened up doors for me and introduced me. So like labs, it's all a racket, right? Labs are a racket, agents are a racket, financing is a racket. It's all a racket that you have to play. And so, like, keep going back to the labs, ask them for feedback on projects that they don't take, like develop a relationship with them. They can help you as a director, hopefully get introduced to managers and and producers and whatever. So all of that was really important. In terms of wages, I think you start with the rate cards, as you can usually find the rate cards online, but like I'm very open with like rates and stuff because a lot of people ask, other producers are trying to figure out what to ask for a film. And for so long, and as women, I think we do this too, like I would undercut myself because I didn't want to ask for too much and then not get the job. An agent is very helpful with that because you don't have to ask for anything. They ask on your behalf, and they will always mark it up 15% because they know they'll have to come down, and they want you to be happy. But I think you have to find a close network of people that are working, and to develop an openness with them, because I have a group of people that, my mentor from Columbia just called me and said, what is the going price for this? What did you make on this? But she knows she can do that because she knows I can also do that for her. And you just have to develop those relationships. I think it should be a lot more open. The union rate cards are helpful though, because you can look at the DJ rate card and see what directors are getting paid for weekly television or for indie films, for tier 1A films or 1B. You can start with that and go from there. That's kind of, I would recommend doing that. For writers, I would also say look at the WGA rate cards. It's all out there. You know what people should be getting paid for a rewrite or a polish on a script. Like, you should know that and ask for it. You should ask for it too. You should know it and ask for it.
Yeah, and I'm still shocked even now, because eventually I'm going to see the budget, and also now I just know general rates. I'll still get offered like half the rate or something, and I know the sound guy is getting paid more or whatever if I'm directing or producing, and it's just shocking, like the audacity that, oh, you're a woman, it's fine, or something, the mentality. So I totally push back now, and I also tend to work more with people I know, so we've already known each other
I
for
think
so
with
many years, but
directors,
I'm
what I have
surprised.
heard being the conduit of that news of like what you're going to get paid or not get paid sometimes is that they say, well, the director gets this film will help them make their next film. So we shouldn't have to pay if it's a non-DGA. I mean, I work in the DGA world, which makes it so once you are able to bump up, it's like it's out there. People have quotes, you meet the quote or you don't meet the quote, or you do like minimum basic rate or you do whatever. But I think before that, what I would hear from people, well, they're going to be able to take this film to help them make their next film, so we can undercut their rate. And it's just wrong. It's just wrong. But I fell into it, so I don't know. Like I would make films for free, so I could, I needed to bulk up my resume early on, so I did a lot of work for free. Now, that was before the age of branded content. I think it's a lot easier to prove yourself with beautiful branded narrative content on short form. It's really a lot easier to like show your muscles in producing or directing or whatever with that. So
Yeah, and they turn out so much work. So yeah, definitely. Wendy, any thoughts?
Well, I think for me, it's not going to be a popular thing to say, but I think for me, I've never thought life is fair, right? And I still don't think life is fair. And I don't think it's ever going to be fair. So for me, I think if you're expecting that everybody is going to be considerate of everybody else, you're going to block your own progress. I think I grew up, since, again, I'm older than you guys, I had this paradigm that I had to pay my dues, that I had to work my way up. And I never worked for free because I couldn't afford to work for free. But I worked for very little. My first job, I lived with my grandmother, and I definitely believe in it's an interesting time because I think the culture has really shifted. I really believe in standing up for yourself as a woman. I look at what's going on with the Me Too movement, and I put up with so much shit when I was in my 20s and 30s. Nobody ever touched me. That was not going to happen. But I had to speak up for myself and tell people to back the fuck off. So I'm a big believer in, I am nobody's victim. I am making choices that I'm responsible for in my life. And if I take a job, I better do a really great job at that job. And I always felt like being the last one standing was kind of the way to go as a producer. And by that, I mean, I never was paid fairly. If I made the Italian job, one producer made millions and I had to beg for a $50,000 fee. So I'm 100% cognizant of the disparity that's built into the system. However, I'm not sorry that I did the Italian job for that little amount of money because it made me so capable of doing my own work. And I feel like paying the dues and coming up within the system for me, it built my self-confidence, and I always had that base, as I said, to support myself and my family. And I'm not saying it was easy. I'm not saying it was fair, but to me, working is always preferable to not working or saying no because it's not fair. I was an executive briefly for 2 years at Paramount, and I hated doing that because it's not producing, it's a whole different job. And literally the man who had the office next to mine made twice the money I did. And he was a dope. He was literally a dummy. And he had a big relationship with a famous movie star at the time who had a deal with the studio. And that's just the reality. So I'm not saying you should ever put yourself at physical risk. That is unacceptable. I'm not saying you should ever not speak up for what you think is right, because that's the only way to produce movies, is to speak up for your crew, speak up for your cast. It's very much a job where you're responsible for everybody's well-being and the fairness of the set and the tone of the set and how people are respected or not respected. But you know, a lot of people made a lot more money than me, and I think for me, I stayed the same person through 35 years of this, and that's unusual. I think I still have the same friends I had 40 years ago, and I have other friends too, but I still have the same friends from when I was a kid. And I think, you know, it's a business. You know, my husband is a cinematographer, and he's always trying to help me not personalize it, you know, because I take everything so much to heart. And
yeah, I always try to say that, like, you leave yourself at home, and then there's the person who deals with the industry who's the one who leaves.
It's very hard for me to do, because I to have the energy and the dedication it takes to produce a movie, to manifest that fucking movie with those hundreds of people and all that money and all that time, as Veronica was saying, it's really a Herculean thing. And I always had to put my heart into it, you know. But I think the truth is, especially as a woman, because I know I was brought up and socialized to be the caretaker. Absolutely. I had a sick mother my whole life, and I was definitely brought up to be the functioning caretaker. And I see that in my producing life. Absolutely. And that has, you know, it has positives and negatives for you over the long term. And I think you learn by doing it how to try and find a level that's more constructive for yourself, and say no sometimes. I also never felt like I could say no because I needed money so much. If you can have a partner, if you can have a job that you're doing that covers your living, so you can walk away from situations that are not that great for you, I highly recommend that. You know.
Can I just piggyback on that being okay to say no? Because that brought up for me, I think when you're thinking of your careers, both directors and producers, it brings up for me this very pivotal moment when we wanted to get First Match made. And First Match was a tiny film and we took it we had shopped it to everywhere. We did all the labs with it. Livy did the writer's lab and the Sundance writer and director's lab, all of it. We did all of it. Nobody would make this film with us. And people kept saying it was a $1.2 million film. And they were like, how little can you make this movie for? Mm-hmm. And there's a point in you, and Livy was like, I will make this movie for $5 if you give me $5 to make this movie. And I, at that point, had made several films. And so I like pushed it back against the table, and I was like, we can make this film for $1.2 million. That's how much we can make this film for.
Right.
You can give us $850,000, but you will not get this film. You will get a film, but it will not be the film here that we have written. And I had enough experience making super tiny films at that point that I remember that was the first time I was able to say no in a professional instance. And like my producing partner and the director are sitting at the table with their mouths open, like, why are you walking away from Broad Street? This distributor is going to give us $850,000 to make this film. And I had to say to them, guys, you have to believe in me. Like, people have to, I had just come from Moonlight. Nobody made a living wage. Nobody, Moonlight wasn't Moonlight yet. It hadn't come out or anything. But I had a horrible experience, and I was able to, as she's saying, like, you carry the responsibility of everybody who's making the film with you, and you carry the responsibility of making the film that's on the page.
That's right.
I can't, and so there's a point in your career, if you haven't hit it yet, or you will hit it, where you have to say no and like be okay, like saying no. And when you said that, that really brought that like super, I remember being in the Broad Street offices and they had like moss on their ceilings and it was just like such a weird, fancy place. And we held off for another 2 months and Netflix gave us our money 3 weeks after our go-no-go date. And we went and made the film, and we made the film for the amount of money that we needed to make a tiny film. Like, if we were going to cut, like what I try and tell people is cutting $200,000 or $400,000 out of $1 million budget. Like you cut it out of a $10 million budget, you can figure it out. But yeah, exactly. But like, it's literally a different movie. And I think you, as a director, producer, like emerging or having emerged and like doing your next projects, you have to figure out what that point is if you haven't hit it, and then own it when you hit it. And when everybody's questioning you, you will have to be like, no, I'm making the right choice of saying no here. And for me, that was, I wanted to pay people a living wage, and they were asking me to do, again, not paying people a living wage. And I just couldn't do it another time.
I can't do that either. I on the Brothers Bloom, you know, there was a producing partner who had their own way of working, and I insisted in bringing in a line producer that I had worked with, because I was going to Serbia and Romania, and I wanted somebody
you trust
in that part of the world who I
for sure
did, because I had never done it, and I was just not going to play that game. And, you know, the producer was way backed up about it, and then ended up working with this line producer for like the next 6 movies, because he was the great guy. So you have to know why you're putting your foot down, you know, and protect your movie, protect the investment, protect the quality of the movie, and protect your people. You have to. Yeah,
and the living wage has become a big issue also for crewing up or even on smaller jobs.
I want to say that, by the way, for making First Match, that came full circle when the gaffer came up to me on set with my producing partner and said, by the way, I would have done this film with Ashley Connor, the DP, because I do all her films, but now I can pay my rent and not have to worry about like living my life. And I just want to thank you guys for that.
Yeah, everybody knows.
That's why you do it.
Everybody knows.
Yeah.
Everybody knows if you're a shit.
They do.
They do.
And I think what Wendy said earlier, like in paying your dues, part of those decisions as writer and as producer and director is like, I willingly gave up I had a salary in the budget because I went to Columbia, and that's what they tell you to do is in the budget, put a salary for yourself. You give that up in order to see it on screen or pay for something else. So I didn't take on the job thinking I wasn't going to get paid. But there are times where if you're able to, for me, I was in a position where I could do that and talk to my partner and say, can I do this? And it was okay. But it's
all choices.
Yeah, it's a decision you have to make, and then comes a day where you're like, I'm not doing that anymore. No more labors of love. That's where they're all labors of love. They're just not all. They're all going to be paid labors of love.
I did a $3 million movie, and I didn't take any fee on it.
Yeah.
For the same reason.
Yeah, you wanted to go on screen. So. But also you want it to pay the gaffer who can now pay his rent and eat.
That's right.
In the same month.
That's right. You have to look all those people in the face every day.
And as a director, I know there's a lot of directors on here, so I just want to say, like, as a director, you will also be faced with that. Like,
yes.
And this is like cone of confidentiality, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So like Prentice had to give up part of his fee for us in order for us on Uncorked to do what we needed to do or what he wanted to do, how we wanted to be and be with our people on set, all of that. So like the writer director also because, and that comes back to the directors are always in the producing mix on a small enough film.
Yes.
You are also giving up of your own fee to buy that extra day of shooting, to get the people that you want, whatever it is, you also will have to make those choices.
Yeah, on the $3 million movie I did, the director also forgave a bunch of his money. Yeah, because you got to make the movie.
Okay, so the next topic, this is very thoughtful discussion. The next topic, yeah, so talking about inclusion and the financial aspect of that, or any thoughts on that? Does that make sense? I mean, there were always these arguments that, oh, these types, XYZ types of movies won't do well at the box office previously, but then we had Black Panther or whatever, and at different scales, how to promote inclusion or be an ally in that sense. And even like women in Hollywood are 3% behind the camera in many positions. So yeah.
I think
Go ahead.
I would say that inclusion is going to get easier because the distribution is different. So because I would say there's an unfortunate side to most of the money coming from streamers at this particular point in history. But that allows, I have found the streamers have always been, it used to be like edgier was inclusion, and now like they're willing to do that, again, because they think they will find their audience with their own algorithms. And so, yeah. I mean, First Match is for me a good example. If the lead in First Match was a 17-year-old white girl, it would have been a very different financing situation to get that film done. But we were told by many traditional distributors that there was nobody similar. So just to explain what she's talking
Emma
about.
Watson of it.
Exactly. To explain the bankableness, the word bankable, there were no, at that time, bankable young African-American women besides Willow Smith. And if you have Willow Smith on your film becomes a very different film because the whole Smith family becomes involved in your film. And the director was really nervous about losing kind of her vision of the film. And so we wanted to avoid that if we could. And so at that time, Netflix, we were one of the first Netflix indie films, but they were willing to take a chance not having a big name in the lead and maybe filling it out with, I mean, Yahya is big now, but he wasn't big. Similar to Moonlight, like Mahershala hadn't done anything before he did Moonlight. Like Naomi Harris was our biggest actress on Moonlight, and she was there for 3 days. We full schedules because she got sick, so she could come for just her 3 days. And so that's where like it all is going to be cyclical, right? That's where packaging becomes very important because you want to get the next big thing. But I do feel like inclusion is going to be easier, I think, with streamers because they're willing to take bigger risks on films that have less traditionally bankable names, getting what Wendy was talking about, pre-sales. I have never financed a movie with pre-sales because I don't work at that budget level, right? I work in $15 million and less. So that's usually done with private equity. They still need bankable actors if you think you're going to have a theatrical release, but most of my films haven't been sold as being theatrical releases. And the way you think of recouping your money, your pitch to investors is a little bit different than kind of the model that Wendy is talking about. And so that's where you have to have kind of traditional bankable names, and streamers don't have to do that as much, although they're kind of getting into it now, but they didn't have to do it as much. So inclusion and telling stories by new writers, new voices, seeing new faces, like it's important. Representation is important. I have staked most of my career on working with people either in front of or behind this camera that look different from me. And that was a choice to do so that we could elevate and amplify voices that don't normally get to be heard. And if you can contain your films to be shot at a smaller budget, and then it's easier to operate that way with kind of financing and streamers. I mean, on First Match, we were 75% women and all of our heads of department were women. And we made a mandate before there were inclusion writers that like, that's how we were running the set because our team was women. And we say women and Brian, because Brian came on board late and he got us into Netflix. We got our money and he was a producer. Great. Thank you. And he came and visited us on set too. So, but like, it was important for us to do that. By the way, we made a big deal about that with Netflix. They didn't hop on board, and we talked to them last summer and they were like, man, we really wish we would have made a follow-up movie with you guys, knowing that we could have been on the leading edge of that curve instead of not. And it wasn't for lack of us pitching them other projects with other kind of underrepresented voices. So it was just that they were not willing to really move in that direction, which I think they are now. They're all making that commitment. So
and also now it's algorithms, but for us it was like niche marketing. Like I started out at an online distributor of division of Universal, so doing that for ourselves and learning to have that language with a network or a studio and doing that homework yourself to prove that stuff. At least to have an argument in the room.
Absolutely.
So Wendy?
I have a slightly different perspective on that, having worked more in kind of commercial, more mainstream, you know, studio environments and companies and sort of the budgets that are a bit bigger or much bigger. And I think, again, I start with personal taste, and I always tended toward stories that were female driven. Anyway, I just did, which are harder to get made, you know, maybe less so now, but always were harder to get made. So I think some of that comes from who you are as a person and what interests you. And then I think, you know, it's funny when Veronica was talking, of course, you think of all these like light bulb moments where you had some horrible experience that was, you know, race related or something. And I remember one at Paramount, you know, it was a big studio, and I was doing a movie called Get Rich or Die Trying, which starred 50 Cent, and the script was a lot better than the movie. There was a really good writer named Terrence Winter who wrote the script on spec and gave it to me in New York. And I thought the script was really strong. And I met 50, and he was so hardworking and really, I thought, charismatic. And the studio ended up making that movie because they wanted to have a deal with Interscope, which is 50's management company.
And now he's producing all these TV shows.
He is. He's really killing it. And actually, friends of mine are working with him, and it's very funny because he was like 28 years old when we did this. So at the time, you know, the guy that ran Interscope Records, Jimmy Iovine, who was Eminem's manager and 50's manager, gave the script to a director named Jim Sheridan, because he also represents Bono, and Bono was friends with Jim Sheridan and said, oh, I want to give it to my friend Jim. And so here's Jim Sheridan calling up Paramount saying, I'm going to direct this movie. And he was not the right director for this movie. And it didn't matter to the studio because their primary interest was the relationship, as I said, with Interscope. That had Gwen Stefani and Gaga and all these, you know. So I got stuck with Jim Sheridan, who I really respected and admired as a director. I just didn't think he was the right director for this material. And it's such a complicated thing. At the time, there was somebody running the studio who did not run it for very long, because this is another thing. If you work at these big companies, there's a lot of politics and turnover of staffs and stuff.
Yeah, and they may even restart the whole production.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Are you leaving? Okay. Okay. Love you. And at the time, the person that was running the studio, who was female, I shall just say, looked at me and in a staff meeting, and we were making Get Rich or Die Trying, and looked at me down this table and said, why are you doing this movie? Meaning, why is a middle-aged white Jewish woman making a 50-cent movie. And that's in front of 30 executives. And my response to that question was, it's going to be a great movie. So I feel like at every level that you're going to work with, whether it's literally the head of the studio, no offense, or the head of the network, or some, I had a director once who was African-American accuse the special effects guy of being racist when a stunt didn't work. I mean, people struggle with this area, and are not great at being self-aware. They're just not. And I think all I ever felt I could be was a good person who was fair and self-aware and proactive and knew why I was making the stories I was making and knew why I was hiring, the costume designer who was Black on this movie, or why I was hiring this person on that movie. And I think it just comes down to each person. I do, doing the right thing. I don't know if I even just said something politically incorrect, but that's what I actually think. I don't expect much of other people, frankly, after doing this for 35 years. I expect a lot of myself. And I think that you set the tone for your movie, for your set, for your world that you create, and that's your responsibility, and you have to sleep at night and live with yourself,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm answering you well, or I don't.
No, that's fine.
Because I've worked with so many women and so many minorities my whole life. I come from New York, and I just don't see the same issues that I find a lot of people that I met along the way see. I just don't get them. I don't understand why I can't do a 50-cent movie. Why can't I do a 50-cent movie? I don't have a problem with doing that movie. Why would anybody else have a problem with me doing that movie? But they do. So I don't think that there's a perfect answer to any of this except to lead by example. I don't know what else to say as an answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've gone really far over 1 hour, so I'm just going to open it up for questions quickly, and Veronica has to go, and I'm sure other people also have to go. Are there any questions? You guys can just unmute yourselves.
I have a question I can ask for both of you. I don't know.
Oh, so introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is India. I'm a sophomore at Oberlin. I live in Brooklyn.
Hi, India.
Hi. I was wondering, I don't know how much you would have like modern experience of this, because there haven't been like sets like they used to be, but there's just been a lot of talk about like how to make sets safer for people and like safer environments and like making sure everyone's comfortable. And so I've just been thinking about that lately, and I was curious of what you guys thought, how to make like everyone on set feel comfortable and like safe when you're running things.
Do you mean pandemic wise, or do you mean more like harassment wise, or all of it?
In general, yeah, just like to make, especially, yeah.
Veronica, do you want to answer first?
I think pandemic wise, I mean, we've been filming in the pandemic, but my teams are much smaller now that I work in documentary for 2 years. So it's been lovely to only have to track 6 people in their testing. But there's so many industry white papers. There's like 4 standard industry white papers that you can read about all the safety protocols on set, and most everybody follows them, and there's different zones, and you can go from one zone and not into the others, and everybody is separated and keeps safe, and they test all the time. I think the only complaints I've been hearing from friends that are working on set is just like when somebody goes down, they're not replaceable. So it's just like the rest of the team has to pick up the load of that. My friend who's a costume designer, when her assistant goes down, it's not like she gets another assistant. It means that she goes 2 weeks without an assistant, and everybody, when the set dresser or whatever, you know, it's just like whatever that person is. Maybe a set dresser, you could get somebody else in, but there's specific, you know, people on set that if they get sick, everybody just has to pick up the load and you have to figure out how to move forward in terms of pandemic stuff. And I do think like, hopefully this will have us all working shorter days. I know that with our productions, we have instituted 10-hour days, not 12-hour days, just to keep everybody safe. And I just think I would love to have that instituted in our industry. It'd be great.
That'd be great.
Because people don't realize, like, producers, we're all working 2 hours before and 4 hours after. So like we have 20-hour days, and I would love to not have a 20-hour day every day for 8 months. But so that I think is good. I think, and they have all their safety officers. I just think it adds more money. So what that's going to do for where I work in the lower budget space is less films will get made because you will need more money to make your film. So you have to make sure your scripts are that much better so that you stand out and get the money over other projects, because you will need more time. If we have 10-hour days, you don't get to shoot less scripts. So, or I also recommend, by the way, don't make your scripts more than 100 pages. 95, that's all you're going to get money for. You're never going to get more than 4 or 5 shooting weeks for your low budget films. So like if it's your first or second film, just don't write the 120 pages, write it and then cut out 25 pages so that you can send it out to people. Nobody even wants to read a 120 page script. But anyway, you're going to need more time. If we have less time on set, you still have to shoot the same page count. So you know you're going to have more time, which is going to cost more money. So less low budget films are going to get made. Now at the higher end, you know, theatrical and tentpole, like how day and date release and how blowing up windows and all of that affects kind of the other end, I don't know. But I can see that for the lower budget end is like going to make it a little tougher. I also think that on the lower budget end, people are not going to follow protocol and it's going to get bad. I think people will get sick.
Yeah.
Stuff will shut down. You won't be bonded. Investors will lose their money and people will be in trouble. And so, because they're going to try and cut the same corners that they've always cut in low budget indie filmmaking. And this time the stakes are higher. I don't know. They've always been high. People could always die if they're driving a vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. Like
after 18-hour shoot days, like it's still high, but like I think there's more possibility of things going wrong. In terms of like personal safety on set and harassment, I mean, it's why I prefer to have a majority female crew. Sorry for Ben, I'm sorry, but that's just how I prefer to work. It doesn't always happen, but I always advocate for it when I am hired on a film or when I'm building my own teams. So that's just, I think, then you're building a team of people. You know, I think if you can advocate for the right creative heads to come on and then you build that team out. I have a no assholes policy conversation that I have with everybody before they're hired and make sure that they understand, as Wendy was saying, like you set the tone. But there are like coordinators now for sex, like there's just ways of doing things that ensures that everybody feels comfortable. I mean, normally you just close down the set anyway. I don't think you need to have, you know, I think it's up to the director, producer, and that cast member to make sure that that person feels safe in whatever situation you set up. But I think we've been doing sex scenes for a long time. And I think, you know, if you are an aware enough producer and director, then you do that in a way that doesn't make the person uncomfortable. So I'll stop there.
I would address that. I'm just going to use my Disney experience as an example. Because I don't know if anybody saw the Descendants franchise, but it was 17 kids. And they ranged from 12 years old to, 22. And I think part of why I got hired to do those movies by the studio was to watch out for the kids. And by that, I mean, you have parents, which is a whole other energy suck like beyond as the producer. And you have young people who are so excited to be getting to be in a movie. And somebody needs to be paying attention that there's safety, and I don't mean just physical safety, but kids not doing drugs, kids not going out at night. There's a big paparazzi problem if you're working with famous actors, famous kids, any kind of anything that has a profile. There's a lot of online stuff. It's very threatening. So I always, not to be negative, but I always felt a little bit like mama cop. And I think it would be my responsibility to say to the studio, I need security on this person. Or somebody is showing up at the set, and I go and I talk to them. If somebody shows up at my set who I don't know, who are you? How'd you get here? Why are you here? And I'm very nice, and sometimes I throw them off, nicely, very nicely. But it's and then also if you're working in a big studio setting like a Disney, they will send you officers who speak to the cast and the crew at the beginning of a shoot, and they give you parameters for what is appropriate behavior, what's not appropriate behavior, phone numbers to call. I'm not the biggest fan of this system because I think it breeds a lot of anonymous complaint stuff, where people don't have to be accountable. They can just call a number and complain about somebody else, which I think is not a great system. I try to be, I'm on the set all the time. I'm always there when we're shooting. If anybody has a problem, I tell everybody to come to me, tell me what the problem is. Can I help them? Whether it's kids or whether it's adults, I think, there's a need for somebody to sort of be where the buck stops. That's that old expression. And I think that's the producer's job. The director is very busy. And I think it's an imperfect system. I think human beings are always going to be human beings. There are going to be romances. There are going to be, people who don't get along. There are going to be, the thing that broke my heart was you would have a kid who's all of a sudden sick. That to me is devastating. So I actually had this conversation with Netflix about the upcoming movie that I'm developing. And I just directly said, so are you picturing going into production during the pandemic on this? Because again, it's another big, a lot of kids, a lot of locations. And they said, oh, no, we're going to do this post-pandemic. And I said, that's good. I don't want to do this where you're managing this big a set with this many cast members, a lot of them being young. I don't want people getting sick. And I've been through stuff with having these big casts of kids, and it just breaks my heart. I can't do it anymore. So I think you have to make decisions about, as a producer or as a director, about what feels like a healthy work environment for you and for everybody else, and stick to your guns about it. Don't ever bend about that. That is a line you cannot cross. You never cross the safety line. Never, ever.
Okay, so I think that's a good note to end on. We've gone over quite a bit, but is there a way people can follow you on social media or anything? Website?
I am intentionally not on social media. I'm sorry, but the Disney thing is just, you don't want to be on social media. But I would say if you want to give somebody my email, Shilpa, you can do that.
All right.
If somebody wants to send me an email, I'm happy to have a dialogue or respond.
Thanks. That would be great. And
yeah, I keep my social media very personal. I am not a personality.
Okay.
So don't follow me because I'm not a personality. And you can share my email with people. I'm up to reading things and responding, but to know that we're working producers, working, we work full-time jobs and have other responsibilities. And so like, know that it will take me a month to get back to you. And let me know if you need something quicker, if you have a question or whatever. I do normally say when I'm asked to do these sorts of things that like one of the reasons I was able to like have a career was because in grad school, people would come and talk to our classes and I would be the person that followed up with those people. And later down the line, those people gave me jobs. So be that person.
I agree. Reach out. I'm happy to respond, and I'm in between movies, so I can respond quick.
Okay, so thank you, both of you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for giving us so much of your time. We know you're super busy producers, both of you. And you definitely shed a lot of light on a lot of these topics we've been talking about.
Good.
So we appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Everybody, just do what you want to do. Don't give up. Keep going.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.